On December 2nd, 2018, a phone was buzzing non-stop. They were birthday messages for Grace Millane, but she would never read them. In the middle of her dream trip to New Zealand, the young British woman who had just turned 22 had vanished. Grace's silence was the first sign of a terrifying truth. What began as the adventure of a lifetime was about to become one of the most talked about nightmares in recent years. Grace Millane was a 21-year-old British woman, radiant and full of life. A recent university graduate, she had embarked on the adventure of her dreams, a year-long backpacking trip around the world. She had already explored South America for 6 exciting weeks. New Zealand was a special stop, a country her own mother had traveled through years before. She arrived on November 20th, 2018, and from that moment on, she kept her family in Essex, England, updated on every step with constant photos and messages. On December 1st, 2018, Grace was in Auckland. The next day, December 2nd, would be her 22nd birthday. Her phone was buzzing non-stop. Happy birthday messages, video calls from friends and family eager to celebrate with her, even from a distance. But Grace never answered any of those messages. The silence became deafening. What should have been a day of celebration turned into the beginning of a dark premonition. Those loving congratulations were left hanging in a void, the first sign that something terrible had happened. On November 30th, 2018, Grace returned to Auckland and checked into a backpacker hostel in the city center. Like many young people her age, she used dating apps. On Tinder, she matched with a 26-year-old man named Jesse Kempson. On Saturday, December 1st, Grace got ready for her date. She left her hostel around 5:30 in the afternoon. Shortly after, she sent her family what would be her last communication, a photo of a Christmas tree in the Sky City complex, a festive image that would stand in brutal contrast to what was to come. Auckland's security cameras tracked Grace and Kempson's steps that night. They are seen visiting several bars, Andy's Burgers and Bar, then the Mexican Cafe, and finally the Bluestone Room. They drank, talked for hours, and even kissed. A date that, to any outside observer, would seem normal, the start of a possible connection. Technology and public spaces offered an apparent layer of security, an illusion that would soon be shattered. Around 9:40 p.m., the cameras captured them leaving the last bar. They walked together to the City Life Hotel, the place where Kempson lived. The elevator footage is the last that exists of Grace Millane alive. She entered the elevator with Kempson, which would take them to his apartment on the 3rd floor. Behind that semblance of normality, Kempson hid a manipulative nature, a mask that Grace had no chance of seeing through until it was too late. December 2nd arrived, Grace's 22nd birthday. In Essex, her family waited anxiously for her call, her messages, but Grace's phone remained silent. The initial concern quickly turned into growing anguish. Grace, so connected to her loved ones, wouldn't let her birthday pass without a sign of life. 3 days later, on December 5th, with no news from their daughter, Grace's parents officially reported her missing. The hostel staff confirmed their worst fears. Grace had never returned on the night of December 1st. The news of a missing British backpacker in New Zealand spread like wildfire. Soon, it was making headlines around the world. The geographical distance, thousands of miles separating Grace from her home, only intensified her family's desperation and the public's attention. Grace's father, David Millane, flew to New Zealand. In a heart-wrenching press conference, his voice breaking with pain, he appealed for public cooperation. He described Grace as a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, and very family-orientated daughter. His suffering in a foreign country moved everyone. Meanwhile, the media machine, though vital for spreading the word, also turned a family's private grief into a public spectacle. The police quickly identified Jesse Kempson as the last person seen with Grace. They contacted him on December 5th, alerted because he had left a comment on one of Grace's Facebook photos. The next day, December 6th, Kempson was questioned. His story was simple and cold. They had a short date, and then they each went their own way. It was the first of many lies. Security cameras, however, told a very different story, showing Grace and Kempson entering the City Life Hotel together. Kempson himself was a pathological liar, a man who, according to the prosecutor, had woven a labyrinth of stories and lies throughout his life to cover his tracks. But the most chilling part was Kempson's actions in the hours and days following Grace's disappearance, while she lay dead in his room. On the night of December 1st to 2nd, between 1:29 a.m. and 6 a.m., his phone records revealed a macabre activity. Kempson watched pornography and took several intimate photographs of Grace's lifeless body. He searched the internet for terms like rigor mortis, extra-large bags, carpet cleaner, hottest fire, and, crucially, Waitakere Ranges, the wooded area where he would later bury her. The next morning, December 2nd, on Grace's birthday, Kempson left his apartment between 8:00 and 10:42 a.m. With unnerving calm, he bought a large suitcase and cleaning products. He rented a car, a red Toyota Corolla. In the afternoon, his Google searches continued. Flesh-eating birds and are there vultures in New Zealand? Incredibly, that same afternoon, between 3 and 8:45 p.m., Kempson went on another Tinder date with a different woman. He also rented a carpet cleaning machine, which he later returned. At 9:26 p.m., the hotel's security cameras recorded him moving Grace's body, hidden inside the newly purchased suitcase, from his apartment to the rental car. Each of these methodical, cold actions did not point to an act of panic, but to the behavior of a calculating and soulless individual whose main concern was covering up his crime. The date with another woman, while Grace's body was nearby, reveals a disturbing emotional disconnect. On December 3rd, Kempson drove to the Waitakere Ranges. On the way, he stopped to buy a shovel. Then, in a secluded spot, he buried Grace in a shallow grave. His digital trail, those internet searches, would become irrefutable proof of his attempts to plan the concealment of the body, debunking any future claim of an unforeseen accident. The police investigation moved quickly. On December 8th, the Auckland police made a devastating announcement. They believed Grace was no longer alive. The missing person case officially became a homicide investigation. That same day, Jesse Kempson was arrested. Confronted with the evidence that dismantled his initial alibi, especially the CCTV footage, Kempson changed his story. He admitted that Grace had died in his hotel room, but insisted it had been an accident during a sexual encounter. It was then, under pressure, that he agreed to lead the police to the place where he had hidden the body. On December 9th, the search came to its tragic end. Grace Millane's body was found. It was inside the suitcase Kempson had bought, buried in a shallow grave in the remote Waitakere Ranges west of Auckland. The way she was found, folded to fit in the luggage, spoke of a brutal attempt to dehumanize and dispose of her, actions incompatible with an accidental death followed by panic. Meanwhile, Kempson's apartment at the City Life Hotel became a key scene. Forensics uncovered compelling evidence. There were significant bloodstains on the carpet and underneath it. The use of luminol revealed the presence of bloody footprints near the bed. Forensic scientist Diane Krenfelt described an area of probable blood staining about 70 centimeters. in diameter with circular marks inside it, suggesting a clear attempt at cleaning. Small droplets of blood were also found on the refrigerator, likely the result of a cast-off event, like blood flinging from a moving hand. DNA analysis left no room for doubt. The blood belonged to Grace Millane. The probability of it belonging to someone else was astronomically low, on the order of it being 500 trillion times more likely to be Grace's. Forensic science, meticulous and relentless, was beginning to give Grace a voice, revealing the violence Kempson tried to hide and contradicting his initial versions of events. The trial against Jesse Kempson began on November 4, 2019 at the Auckland High Court. Kempson pleaded not guilty to the murder of Grace Millane. The defense, led by lawyer Ian Brookie, presented an argument that shocked many and caused deep pain to the Millane family. They maintained that Grace's death was an unfortunate sexual accident that occurred during a consensual act. They alleged that Grace was interested in BDSM practices and had asked Kempson to lightly choke her to heighten pleasure. But the situation got fatally out of hand. They admitted Kempson buried the body, but attributed it to panic. This defensive strategy, known as the rough sex defense, attempted not only to exonerate Kempson, but also to shift blame onto Grace herself, scrutinizing her sex life and alleged interests to justify the unjustifiable. As Detective Inspector Scott Beard pointed out, this type of defense re-victimizes the victim and their families, as the victim is no longer there to tell her side of the story. The prosecution, led by Brian Dickey, methodically refuted this narrative. They argued that Kempson strangled Grace to death. They presented the overwhelming evidence of his calculated actions after the crime. The internet searches on how to dispose of a body, watching pornography next to Grace's corpse, the photos he took of her after she died, cleaning the room, buying, the suitcase and shovel, and his date with another woman while Grace lay lifeless. All of this demonstrated, according to the prosecution, a labyrinth of stories and lies concocted to evade justice. Forensic pathologist Simon Stables testified that the bruises on Grace's body were consistent with being held down and forcibly choked, not with consensual erotic asphyxiation. Furthermore, 3 women whom Kempson had previously met through Tinder took the stand. Their testimonies were crucial. They stated that Kempson liked to practice choking during sex and exhibited controlling behaviors. One of them described him as a Jekyll and Hyde, capable of drastic personality changes. These statements, while not directly proving Grace's murder, painted a disturbing and relevant pattern of behavior. On November 22, 2019, after a 3-week trial and 5 hours of deliberation, the jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, delivered its verdict. Jesse Kempson was found guilty unanimously of the murder of Grace Millane. The jury members were not fooled by the defendant's version. For Grace's parents, David and Jillian, who had endured the ordeal of hearing their daughter blamed and shamed in a foreign country, her privacy laid bare, without her being able to defend herself, the verdict brought a glimmer of justice. On February 21, 2020, Jesse Kempson was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Following Jesse Kempson's conviction for the murder of Grace Millane, and after his appeals were dismissed, the suppression of his name was finally lifted. It was then that New Zealand society and the world discovered the true extent of his depravity. It was revealed that Kempson had already been convicted in 2 other trials, held in October and November 2020, for a series of brutal sexual offenses against 2 other women. These included rape, sexual violation by penetration, threats to kill, and assault. One of these victims was another British tourist whom Kempson raped just 8 months before murdering Grace. These revelations painted a terrifying picture. Grace was not the victim of a sexual encounter gone wrong, but of the final and most horrendous act of a serial sexual predator. The murder of Grace Millane deeply shook New Zealand, a country with a reputation for being safe for travelers. Then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern expressed the national shock with an emotional public apology to the Millane family. "She should have been safe here," she said. However, this tragedy also exposed a painful contradiction. New Zealand, despite its image, has one of the highest rates of violence against women in the OECD. Grace's family, with admirable strength, has since worked to raise awareness about male violence and to honor their daughter's memory. Auckland remembered Grace by illuminating its Sky Tower and Harbour Bridge in white.